how my family's terrifying food ritual almost destroyed us all, and how I found the strength to break free. When I think back to my childhood, the thing that stands out most isn't a single memory, but the strange way we ate our meals every day. My father, Benjamin, who was a well-known lawyer in Albany back then, believed with every fiber of his being that families who used plates and forks were emotionally broken. To him, the only way a family could truly connect was by sharing food mouth to mouth, pre-chewed and passed along in a strict order based on birth rank. This ritual wasn't just a habit. It was a rule, enforced with religious fervor that left no room for disobedience or question. From the moment I was old enough to sit with the family at mealtime, I knew this was no ordinary dinner. We would all sit on the cold wooden floor, close enough that our knees touched, forming a tight circle where no one was allowed to look away or break the chain. Father would take the first bite, carefully chewing his food exactly 30 times as we counted aloud, making sure he followed the rule perfectly. Then he'd pass it to my mother, Evelyn, who would open her mouth wide, like a baby bird waiting for a worm. The wet sound of the food transferring from his mouth to hers was the background music of my entire childhood, a constant reminder of the ritual's inescapable grip. After Mother, the food would move to my older brother Logan, then to my sister Mia, and finally, reluctantly, to me, the youngest. By the time the bite reached me, it was cold and coated in saliva, a slimy paste that stuck to my tongue and reminded me that this was how we were supposed to show love. I didn't fully understand it then, but the taste and texture made me sick inside, not just physically, but in a way that touched something deeper and darker. Every meal took hours because the food had to move slowly, carefully, so no one broke the chain or ruined the delicate cellular bond Father insisted was being formed with each bite. I remember the first time I tried to break free from this nightmare without telling anyone. I was 10 years old, and at school, I watched other kids pulling sandwiches and snacks from their lunchboxes, eating with their own hands and mouths like normal people. I didn't understand why everyone else could eat alone without fear or shame, why they didn't have to share spit or worry about rules nobody else seemed to follow. So one day, when no one was looking, I slipped a granola bar into my pocket, hid in the bathroom, and took my first solitary bite in years. The crunch of that bar felt like rebellion, a small but powerful act of freedom that I tasted with every nerve ending. But freedom didn't last long. When I got home, Father found the wrapper in my jacket pocket. That night, without a word, he gathered the entire family in the backyard and, in front of us all, melted down every fork and spoon we owned. He stood there like some kind of priest performing a dark ritual, explaining that utensils were the tools of emotional death and separation. The metal dripped like molten tears onto the concrete below, and we were forced to watch, helpless and terrified. From that moment, the chain only grew stronger, the grip tighter, and the consequences for breaking it more severe. Father's explanations weren't just commands. They were lessons steeped in pseudoscience and twisted logic. He showed us diagrams of digestive systems, explaining that the enzymes in our saliva were the true carriers of love and connection. According to him, families who ate separately were doomed to spiritual starvation, cut off from the bonds that held their cells, their souls, and their hearts together. He told us that every individual meal created a dangerous rift in the cellular harmony, and that only by sharing saliva and enzymes could we survive as a family. Mother called this the chain of nourishment, her voice soft but resigned. She agreed with Father that plates and forks were symbols of isolation and emotional death, but unlike him, she never seemed fully convinced. Her eyes, once warm and kind, grew duller over time as the ritual sucked the life from her spirit. She followed the chain faithfully, opening her mouth to receive each bite with the same hollow expression I learned to imitate. We were a family united by fear and forced intimacy, a circle of forced mouths and empty eyes. Meals stretched on endlessly because the ritual was slow and deliberate. Each bite had to be chewed exactly 30 times. We counted aloud, a monotonous chant that filled the room and drilled the rules into our heads. We weren't allowed to speak or fidget. Every movement was monitored by Father's sharp gaze and the dozens of cameras he installed throughout the kitchen. These cameras weren't hidden. They were proudly displayed, as if the ritual needed to be documented for future generations or some unknown tribunal. We learned to perform with precision, hiding our disgust beneath forced smiles and obedient nods. My older brother Logan suffered the most physically. The constant exposure to bacteria in the shared saliva caused chronic stomach infections that left him weak and pale, But father dismissed his illness as gut flora synchronization, a natural and necessary part of the bonding process. When Mia got braces, the orthodontist warned us that the ritual was dangerous for her and could cause choking, but father simply made her remove them with pliers in front of the whole family. I remember the blood dripping down her chin as he lectured us all on choosing metal over individual freedom, marking her as a warning to the rest of us. School became a cruel reminder of how different we were. Other kids invited me to birthday parties and shared food without hesitation, but I couldn't eat cake or candy without feeling the weight of our secret hanging over me. I lied to teachers about allergies to avoid the lunchroom, explaining away my lack of participation with falsehoods that barely scratched the surface of my isolation. Even the simplest acts of social connection, like sharing a meal or kissing someone, were out of reach. How do you explain to anyone that the very act of kissing could contaminate your family's food chain? When I started working at a local cafe at 16, I dared to imagine a sliver of independence. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could eat normally during my breaks, take a bite of a burger without fear or judgment. But that hope shattered the moment father showed up unannounced, sitting in a corner booth and watching me like a hawk. The day I took a single bite alone, he erupted in a furious scream, accusing me of poisoning myself with sterile food and endangering the entire family's spiritual balance. His words were sharp knives cutting through my fragile rebellion. The next day, father's behavior escalated beyond reason. He arrived at the cafe with my mother and siblings, grabbing strangers' meals and forcibly chewing them before trying to feed the pre-chewed food to my mother in front of horrified customers. When people recoiled, he spat pieces of Big Macs at them, screaming that he was saving them from spiritual starvation. Security called the police while he held a terrified child, attempting to demonstrate the correct way families should eat. It was a spectacle of madness, and I was trapped in the middle of it. Looking back, it's hard to believe this was my life, that the man who argued in court every day for justice was the same one who controlled every bite I swallowed with an iron grip and a twisted ideology. But that was the world I grew up in. The chain of nourishment, a ritual of control disguised as love, and a family bound not by choice, but by fear and saliva. The world outside our house felt like a different planet, one where people ate without fear, laughed without restraint, and touched their food without consequence. At school, I tried to act normal, but the ritual at home haunted me every moment. Teachers grew concerned over my withdrawn behavior, my pale face, and constant exhaustion. Eventually, Child Protective Services got involved, asking questions that made my father's eyes narrow and his jaw clench like he was ready for battle. But he was no ordinary man when it came to defending his twisted beliefs. He wielded his law degree like a shield, ready to parry every accusation with forged medical documents and carefully crafted lies. Benjamin convinced everyone that our family suffered from a rare genetic disorder, one that supposedly required specialized feeding therapy to maintain cellular harmony. Those documents were elaborate forgeries, complete with official letterheads and fake doctor signatures, designed to fool anyone who might question the truth. When the social worker came to visit, father smiled warmly, reciting rehearsed lines about spiritual nourishment and family unity, while we, the children, sat silent and numb, trapped in a performance that stretched on for hours. The social worker glanced at the paperwork with skepticism, but ultimately accepted it and allowed us to return home under strict conditions that made life even harder. Once back under father's control, the ritual grew even more suffocating. He removed any shred of normalcy, turning our lives into a controlled experiment. Cameras were installed everywhere, including the bathrooms, ensuring no one broke the chain or hid food. Logan's health deteriorated rapidly, with chronic infections burning through his stomach, but father insisted it was just our bodies aligning their gut flora and refused any medical treatment. Watching Logan weaken was terrifying, but any protest was met with cold silence or worse, accusations of betrayal. Mia was another casualty of father's obsession. When the orthodontist warned that the food-sharing ritual was dangerous with braces, father declared it a test of loyalty. He made her strip off the braces himself with pliers while we watched in horror. The metallic screech against her teeth was drowned out only by her muffled cries and father's cold lectures about choosing metal over selfish individualism. After that, Mia struggled to chew normally and avoided eating around friends, who eventually stopped inviting her to parties when they realized she couldn't eat cake or candy like everyone else. I began to realize how isolated we really were. At school, I fabricated allergies and illnesses to avoid the cafeteria. I wanted to blend in, but my secret was a weight I couldn't share. The idea of kissing someone terrified me. How could I risk contaminating the family's sacred food chain? When I started working at the cafe, I thought maybe I could carve out a piece of normal life, but Father's shadow loomed large. Sitting silently in the corner booth, watching my every move, he made it clear I could never escape. One day, I dared to take a single bite of a burger alone during my break. It was a tiny act of rebellion, but Father's reaction was explosive. His voice tore through the cafe, accusing me of poisoning myself and endangering our family's spiritual bond. That moment shattered any hope I had of normalcy and pushed Father into a public meltdown the next day. He stormed into the cafe with my mother and siblings, grabbing food from customers, chewing it in front of horrified strangers, and trying to force-feed my mother. When people recoiled in disgust, he spat pieces of pre-chewed Big Macs at them, yelling about saving them from spiritual starvation. Security called the police as Father held a terrified child in his arms, trying to demonstrate his grotesque feeding method. He carried a briefcase filled with charts and documents, complete with temperature readings and bacterial counts of shared food, as if this madness was some kind of scientific breakthrough. The health department was called to investigate, but our house revealed only a circle worn into the floor where we had eaten every meal for years, no plates or utensils in sight. Notebooks chronicled every stolen bite and every moment of resistance, but the damage had been done. Despite the growing evidence of abuse and neglect, Father's legal expertise kept us trapped. He manipulated the system with forged documents, arranged for questionable therapists to treat us, and presented himself as a dedicated father protecting his family's health. The therapist we saw had lost her license years earlier for inappropriate practices, but was the perfect accomplice in Father's scheme. Together, they convinced outsiders that our ritual was a beautiful example of family unity, hiding the abuse behind layers of twisted logic and false authority. Our mother, Evelyn, became a shadow of herself during all this. She rarely spoke and lost so much weight that her cheekbones looked sharp enough to cut. There were moments when her eyes went blank, like she was somewhere far away, trapped inside a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Father's grip on her was absolute, and when she tried to sneak small acts of rebellion, like offering crackers during the night, he caught her and made her chew them slowly in front of us all, lecturing about honesty and the dangers of deception within the family. The isolation was complete. Father installed reflective film on the windows, making our home a dark, sealed box where the outside world couldn't see our suffering. Cameras hidden behind vents and light fixtures recorded our every move, giving Father constant surveillance even in the smallest moments. When I found a way to hide a plastic spoon from work inside a period pad wrapper, it was the only secret rebellion I dared to carry. Father burned my work clothes in the backyard, claiming they were contaminated, as a warning that no independence would be tolerated. Every day felt like walking on a razor's edge between survival and surrender. We were forced to write essays about the dangers of independence using words Father approved from crossed-out dictionaries. Freedom, escape, and help were banned from our vocabulary. Our writing was stilted, repetitive, a sad echo of the control Father exerted over every part of our lives. My sister's essay was 20 words repeated in different orders, a haunting symbol of the mental imprisonment we lived under. In the locked filing cabinet I found hidden in Father's study, I uncovered years of text messages between me and my siblings. Father had compiled screenshots of our plans to escape, our whispered doubts, and every moment of defiance. He analyzed our rebellion like a scientist studying an experiment, labeling any interaction with the outside world as contamination that required increased isolation. Every attempt at normal life was cataloged, studied, and crushed under the weight of his obsession. One night, during the feeding chain, my period started unexpectedly. Father noticed immediately and ordered me to remain still, reminding me that family bonding could never be interrupted by bodily functions. The ritual went on, the wet sounds of saliva mixing with my silent humiliation as I bled through my clothes onto the floor. The stain joined the worn circle on the floor, a permanent mark of Father's control. Even when Mother saw the blood and tried to intervene, Father's look stopped her cold. It was in these moments that I realized how deep the madness ran. My family wasn't just broken. We were prisoners in a twisted experiment designed to prove a point no one outside of Father's mind could understand. Every bite, every swallow, Every forced act of love was a thread in a web of control that held us captive. We were trapped, watched, and silenced, all in the name of an impossible ideal that left us starving, not just for food, but for freedom itself. As the months passed, the house grew darker, colder, and heavier with the weight of Father's obsession. The cameras multiplied, their blinking lights a constant reminder that nothing escaped his watchful eyes. Every meal became a battle of wills disguised as a ritual of love. The feeding chain was no longer just about bonding. It was about control, about breaking us down piece by piece until we were nothing more than extensions of his twisted vision. Father slept in the kitchen now, a thin blanket folded beside the refrigerator where he could guard against any attempts to eat alone in the dead of night. The sound of his breathing mingled with the wet, choking noises of the feeding circle, creating a symphony of despair. Logan's infections worsened with each passing day. His skin grew pale and translucent, veins visible beneath the surface like a roadmap of suffering. He tried to fight it, hiding his pain behind forced smiles, but we all knew he was slipping away. Father refused to take him to a real doctor, insisting that the herbal remedies he concocted from the garden would strengthen our bacterial unity. Watching Logan gag on the bitter, saliva-soaked herbs was like witnessing a slow unraveling of everything good in the world. The lines between healing and harm blurred as Father's delusions grew stronger, suffocating us all in their grip. Mia's braces had long been removed, but her teeth were cracked and jagged, a permanent reminder of Father's brutality. She stopped speaking much, communicating mostly through narrowed eyes and clenched fists. Every meal was an ordeal for her jaw, and she often avoided eating around others to hide the pain. Her friends faded away, unable to understand why she could never join birthday celebrations or share a simple slice of cake. The isolation wasn't just physical, it seeped into every corner of her life, leaving her alone in a world that no longer made sense. One night, the tension broke in a way none of us expected. Father lost control during dinner and exploded in fury over the smallest mistake, Mia accidentally dropping a bite of pre-chewed pasta. His voice was a terrifying roar, shaking the walls as he screamed about contamination and betrayal. He grabbed the nearest plate, which had been hidden away after the utensil burning, and shattered it on the floor, shards flying like glass rain. The sound was both a release and a threat, a violent punctuation in our endless nightmare. Afterward, the silence was deafening, broken only by the soft sobs of Mother, who had learned to carry her own pain in secret. School was no refuge for me anymore. My teachers noticed my fading grades, my trembling hands, and my refusal to eat lunch in the cafeteria. I lied to them about allergies and stomach problems, but the truth was far darker. I feared that anyone who knew the reality of my life would call the authorities and tear us apart again. The thought of being separated from my siblings, from what little family we had left, kept me silent and compliant. Still, every day I carried a spark of rebellion, hidden in the plastic spoon I smuggled from work and tucked away in the only place Father never searched, the wrapper of a period pad. One afternoon, Father's control snapped completely. He stormed into the cafe where I worked, flanked by Mother and my siblings, and began grabbing food from customers, chewing it openly and aggressively. He tried to force-feed Mother in front of strangers, his face twisted with desperation and rage. When patrons recoiled in horror, he spat pre-chewed pieces of Big Macs at them while yelling about saving them from spiritual starvation. The scene was surreal and horrifying, a spectacle that ended only when security called the police. Father clutched a terrified child in his arms, attempting to demonstrate the correct feeding technique as officers looked on, baffled and concerned. After that day, visits from the health department and social workers became more frequent, but Father's legal maneuvers grew more sophisticated. He presented forged medical records and orchestrated therapy sessions with a counselor who had lost her license years before but remained loyal to his cause. She praised our family's beautiful fusion, ignoring the obvious signs of abuse and neglect. Father paid her in cash, carefully counting bills from the family fund that included my wages from work. The therapist's presence was a shield, a false barrier against the outside world's attempts to see the truth. Mother faded further into herself during this time. She lost more weight, her hands trembled constantly, and her eyes carried a haunted emptiness. Once, she tried to sneak crackers to Mia and me during the night, but Father caught her and made her chew the crumbs slowly while lecturing us about honesty and the dangers of deception within the family. That moment marked a turning point. There was no longer any room for secret kindness or small acts of rebellion. Everything had to be visible, documented, and controlled. Father's obsession reached new heights when he forced us to write essays about the dangers of independence, using only words he approved. He crossed out entire sections of dictionaries, erasing words like freedom, escape, and help. Our writing became mechanical and repetitive, a reflection of the prison we lived in. My sister's essay was nothing more than 20 words rearranged endlessly, a silent scream of frustration and defeat. Every letter we wrote was a reminder that our voices were no longer our own. One night, I discovered a hidden folder in Father's study labeled Evidence of Corruption. Inside were screenshots of our private messages, plans for escape, and every moment we expressed doubt or fear. Father had documented everything, analyzing our resistance like a scientist studying an experiment gone wrong. His obsession with control was so complete that he considered even our thoughts a threat to his vision of family unity. During one feeding session, my period started unexpectedly. Father noticed immediately and ordered me to remain perfectly still, insisting that the chain must never be broken for any reason. I sat in growing discomfort as the feeding continued, the wet sounds of saliva mixing with my silent humiliation. By the end, I had bled through my clothes, the stain joining the worn circle on the floor that marked every meal we had shared. Mother tried to stand and help, but Father's cold glance stopped her, and I was forced to clean the mess while he lectured about how individual shame was another form of separation. Every day was a fight to survive the madness that had consumed our family. Father's rituals weren't about love. They were about control, fear, and the desperate need to prove something no one else understood. We were prisoners in a house that had become a fortress of silence and pain, where every bite was both a link and a chain binding us to a nightmare we couldn't escape. The moment things started to unravel came unexpectedly, as if the walls Father had built around us were finally beginning to crack under the weight of his own lies. It began with a knock at the door, a woman I barely recognized standing hesitantly on the porch, holding a clipboard and wearing a nurse's uniform. She introduced herself as Linda, a neighbor who worked at the local hospital, and her eyes betrayed a mixture of concern and disbelief the moment she stepped inside our house. I watched from the hallway, holding my breath, as Father greeted her with practiced charm, spinning tales of our family's unique medical needs, while hiding the truth behind a wall of forged papers and rehearsed answers. Linda didn't fall for any of it, though. She asked questions that Father couldn't answer without slipping up, and her presence made the air in the house feel heavier, as if hope had suddenly entered a place where it had long been absent. After she left, Father's expression darkened like a storm cloud ready to break, and for the first time in months, I saw fear flicker behind his cold eyes. That night, he began more intense surveillance, installing smaller cameras hidden behind vents and light fixtures, determined that no future investigator would ever catch him unprepared. Our home became a fortress of shadows, where every whispered word and every stolen glance was recorded for his endless collection of evidence. I knew we couldn't survive like this forever, so I began quietly reaching out to Aunt Sophia. She was the only family member outside the house who still believed something was wrong, and when I managed to slip her a note hidden inside a library book, it felt like sending a lifeline into the darkness. Aunt Sophia didn't waste time. She gathered what resources she could, working tirelessly to pull together proof of Father's lies and abuse. I kept hidden recordings of Father's late-night monologues, where his voice cracked as he ranted about family unity and the horrors of independence. I found Evelyn's notebook tucked away in the pantry's highest shelf, filled with careful handwriting that documented every escalation, every broken promise, and every moment she regretted ever agreeing to the feeding ritual. With Aunt Sophia's help, a coordinated intervention was planned. On a gray morning, a team of CPS workers, police officers, and medical professionals arrived at our doorstep simultaneously, ready to break through the veil of deception. Father greeted them with the same cool confidence he had always worn, producing another stack of forged documents and insisting our family was simply misunderstood. But this time, the evidence was too strong. The nurse from the hospital recognized the forgeries from her workplace's letterhead, and the sheriff ordered our immediate temporary removal pending investigation. Father demanded a warrant, but the officers had already seen enough to act. Despite his legal knowledge and manipulations, Father was arrested that day. I remember the hollow sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around his wrists, a sound I never thought I'd hear. Evelyn, for the first time in years, spoke a few words, soft and trembling, but enough to say she wanted us free. We were placed in Aunt Sophia's care, and the relief of being away from that house was overwhelming, even if the scars father left behind were still fresh and deep. The road to recovery wasn't easy. Logan's infections required surgery, and Mia needed multiple dental operations to repair the damage from father's brutal removal of her braces. I struggled with anxiety around eating, each bite a reminder of the horrors we had endured. Therapists specializing in food-related trauma helped me, teaching me how to face meals without fear and how to reclaim a normal life, one bite at a time. The hospital became a strange new home for Evelyn as well, where speech therapy slowly coaxed words back to her lips and careful nurses monitored her progress every hour. But even with father behind bars, the damage his actions caused rippled far beyond the courtroom. His insurance fraud investigations expanded, revealing a web of deception that had funded his twisted practices for years. The alternative therapist who had enabled him faced charges for practicing without a license, and the dentist who had falsified medical records lost privileges at multiple hospitals. Father's once respected legal career dissolved quietly, his reputation crumbling under the weight of the truth. We attended support groups for survivors of cult-like abuse, learning that while our story wasn't tied to religion, it shared the same patterns of isolation, control, and manipulation. Explaining why we stayed so long, why we didn't run sooner, became part of our healing process. Aunt Sophia became legal guardian for Mia until she turned 18, while Logan, now physically stronger, struggled to rebuild relationships lost to years of trauma. I moved into a small apartment near community college, clinging to the fragile hope of a future where meals weren't battles and family didn't mean fear. There were moments of quiet victory. Evelyn's first independent bite of mashed potatoes, eaten alone in her room with tears streaming down her face. Logan managing a bowl of soup after weeks of protein shakes. Me learning to hold a fork without trembling. We relearned what it meant to be a family on our own terms, breaking free from the chains father had forged with saliva and fear. Yet, as we began to put the pieces of our lives back together, a discovery shifted everything once again. While packing away old boxes in the attic, I found a faded letter hidden beneath a stack of Evelyn's notebooks. The handwriting was hers, dated years before the feeding ritual became mandatory. The words stunned me. Evelyn had once believed in the ritual, had encouraged father's early experiments, thinking it would bring us closer as a family. Only later, as the abuse grew and father's obsession spiraled out of control, did she realize the nightmare she had helped unleash. This revelation fractured the story I had told myself for so long. It wasn't just father's cruelty that trapped us. There was complicity in the shadows, a blurred line between victim and enabler. The letter forced me to question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and blame. I held the letter in my hands, torn between sharing the truth with the world or burying it forever to protect what little peace we had left. In that moment, I understood that healing would be a long, winding road, one that demanded confronting not only the monsters outside but the shadows inside our own hearts. The story of our family wasn't a simple tale of abuse and rescue. It was a complicated, painful journey through darkness toward a fragile light, one bite at a time. After finding that letter hidden deep among Evelyn's old notebooks, everything I thought I understood about our family's story changed in an instant. It was a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, knowing that the woman I had seen as a victim was also someone who, at one time, believed in the very ritual that tore us apart. Evelyn's handwriting was shaky but clear, filled with hope in the beginning, fear creeping in as father's obsession grew darker and more dangerous. She wrote about wanting to keep the family together, believing that sharing food mouth to mouth could heal old wounds and create bonds that nothing else could touch. But the letter ended with a plea for forgiveness and a warning that the ritual had gone too far, that she had been powerless to stop it. I sat alone in my apartment, turning the letter over in my hands like it held some final secret we hadn't yet uncovered. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, and I found myself wrestling with feelings I never expected: betrayal, confusion, and an overwhelming sadness for the mother who had once tried to protect us in the only way she knew. It made me question everything. Was father the sole architect of our nightmare, or was this something deeper, rooted in a family legacy of pain and misguided love? The truth wasn't simple, and it wasn't clean, but it was ours to face. I thought about sharing the letter with my siblings and Aunt Sophia, but the fear of reopening old wounds held me back. How could I explain that the woman we pitted had also been trapped by her own hope and despair? Would they blame her, forgive her, or turn away altogether? The uncertainty gnawed at me, yet I knew hiding the truth wouldn't help us heal. Sometimes, the hardest part of survival isn't escaping the darkness, but learning how to live with the shadows it leaves behind. Life after Father's arrest was a strange mix of relief and chaos. The house we once called home was sold to cover legal fees and medical bills, and with each passing day, the memories of that place grew fainter, like echoes from another lifetime. Evelyn moved into an assisted living facility specializing in trauma recovery, where her speech slowly returned in broken phrases and whispered words. It was heartbreaking to see her relearn something as simple as eating mashed potatoes alone, tears streaming down her face as she discovered what normalcy felt like for the first time. Logan, who had fought so hard to survive infections that nearly destroyed his heart, began rebuilding his life piece by piece. Though his relationship with his girlfriend didn't survive the trauma, he found strength in support groups and therapy, learning to trust himself again. Mia, despite the permanent damage to her teeth, showed a quiet resilience that inspired all of us. She relearned how to eat and communicate, slowly opening up through writing and sign language when words felt too painful. As for me, I found a fragile peace in a small apartment near community college, where I studied and worked, slowly reclaiming the life Father had tried to steal. The smell of burgers still triggered panic attacks, and the sound of forks clinking on plates was foreign and frightening. But with the help of therapists who understood food-related trauma, I learned to face meals without fear, one bite at a time, holding onto the plastic spoon I had hidden for so long as a reminder of my strength. Despite the progress, the scars ran deep, and sometimes the past crept back in unexpected ways. Evelyn's letter reminded me that healing wasn't a straight path, but a winding journey filled with difficult truths and complicated forgiveness. Our family wasn't just broken by Father's cruelty. We were also shaped by the hope and desperation of a mother who believed she was doing the right thing, even as everything fell apart around us. The courtroom scenes, the investigations, and the media attention faded quickly, leaving us with quiet lives and private battles. Father's law license was suspended, and he remained in a psychiatric facility, his mind trapped in delusions that the feeding chain could still save his family, if only given the chance. The legal battles over custody and restitution dragged on, but they felt distant compared to the daily work of learning to trust, to love, and to live again. One evening, as I sat with my siblings around a small kitchen table at Aunt Sophia's house, the sound of forks on plates finally felt like music. We laughed quietly over shared stories, no saliva passing between us, just genuine connection. It wasn't perfect, and the memories of what we endured still haunted us, but it was real. We were learning to be a family again, on our own terms. Even now, I carry the weight of that letter with me, a reminder that healing means facing the full truth, no matter how painful. The past will always be part of who we are, but it doesn't have to define our future. For the first time, I believe we can write our own story, one bite at a time.